I mean, I get really worried about the way that these election debates are now unfolding. Virtually everything in the debate at the moment is about these opinion polls, and apart from a few postal votes, nobody's voted yet. And I just do not for 1 second believe that the Conservatives are going to get virtually wiped out. I just don't believe it. For Labour to win a majority of one, they've got to get a bigger swing than we got in 1997 and Clement Attlee got in 1945. I just think there's something going very, very wrong with these polls. I could be completely wrong, and it's true that Labour have been consistently ahead. But I just wish that in election periods we would talk less about polls and more about what the parties are saying, because I just don't believe these MRP polls, I'm afraid. I think they're absolute nonsense. And when you drill down on some of them, they do these big constituency polls. They say, oh, look, Jeremy Hunt's going to lose his seat and Liz Truss is going to lose her seat. And God, I hope that happens. And on we go. But actually, when you look down, you're talking about tiny numbers of people, sometimes self-selecting, that they're talking to. So, no, I just think we should move off the polls and talk about future of the country, the different things that the parties are putting forward. And ultimately, nobody, when we're going to vote, nobody can vote for an outcome. We can only vote for the one candidate that we're allowed to choose.
Alistair, we're going to do that. We'll forget about the polls for now. We'll probably mention them again, I'm afraid, in the next 2 weeks. But I want to go back to policy. And look, I have always been a student of what you've done and what others have done and what they've done right and wrong in campaigns. And as logical as it seemed, many of the policies of Neil Kinnock and the Shadow Chancellor John Smith in 1992, they lost that one. And again, you're going to educate me here, but lost it in my recollection because John Smith threatened the country with a 50 pence tax rate rather than the 40 pence as it was. Is there a danger that history could not repeat itself, but actually concerns over taxation, because it's become right at the forefront of a lot of the key debate and proper debate this time round? Is that something that actually could send some of these potential Labour voters actually back to the Conservatives and elsewhere?
Well, you're certainly right that Labour leaders through history who have, for clear progressive reasons, wanted to make public services better. Back in that election that you're talking about, the specific proposed tax rises were to fund higher pensions and higher child benefit. And there's no doubt whatsoever that the weight of the Conservative attack upon those proposals, helped by the most right-wing newspapers, frankly anywhere in the world, helped the Conservatives to win that election and Labour to lose. And I think that's one of the reasons why Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are being so cautious in a way. I mean, some of us in the Labour Party think, you know what, you're not boxing yourself in a bit too much by saying no rise in income tax, no rise in national insurance, no rise in VAT. But from a political perspective, I completely understand why they're doing that. And as you've seen since the launch of the manifesto, the Conservative attack now is essentially saying, well, you haven't ruled out this one, and you haven't ruled out that one. And I think Keir Starmer's right to sort of hold firm in saying, well, you're not going to write a whole parliament's worth of budgets. And of course, back to the point about the polls, even though I said I wouldn't mention them, the fact that the narrative within this campaign is already about, the Tories have lost, what happens next, that means that the Conservatives are not put under the same sort of pressure on policy and on the things that they're saying, which frankly I think they should be, as by the way should be the smaller parties like Reform, with that ridiculous nonsense that Farage came out with his costings the other day.
Yeah, the IFS didn't like those costings, but then to be fair, the IFS doesn't like most costings from political parties as well. OK, I'm going to just move forward to 97 versus now, if I may. We've had a brief chat about 92, because I just want to talk about what kind of Labour Party, if they were to form a government, and I don't think it's extreme of me to say it looks like they will form a government, again, regardless of the polls. A lot of the commentary I'm reading, Alastair, is actually the real opposition for Keir Starmer could come from the left, which has been incredibly quiet. I mean, there's been rumblings with the Diana Abbott incident and what have you. But is it possible that actually once the Labour leader and his government he forms a government, that actually the real threat isn't going to come from opposition from the right, it's actually going to come from the left within the party as well, which has just been keeping fairly quiet compared to, dare I say, previous episodes of vociferous disagreement with centre-left politics?
Well, look, I think when Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party, he set it out right at the start, saying that he was going to tear anti-Semitism out from his roots, and he was going to change the Labour Party, understand that the Corbyn leadership had been a disaster for Labour, and that meant it was a disaster for the country because we've had this awful, terrible government. And I think he's done that. And in so doing, and the other thing I think people should be aware of, there has been some pretty tight control of candidate selection. If Labour get a majority, that means there's going to be a lot of new MPs in there. And the vast bulk of those are going to be completely signed up to the policies of the manifesto and the strategic approach that Keir Starmer's set out. And the other thing I'd just point out in relation to that, when Tony Blair was Prime Minister through those whole 3 terms, Jeremy Corbyn was there, John McDonnell was there. I think I'm right in saying that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell rebelled against the government more than any MPs have ever rebelled against the government. But you're able to withstand that kind of thing if you've got a reasonably sized majority.
Yeah. Alastair, I mean, you're former director for comms and strategy then for Labour. Has messaging been clear this election? I mean, one could say that the reason why you end up focusing on things like the polls is because, well, messaging on economic policy hasn't necessarily been, as forthright.
I think the messaging has been pretty clear, but I think that perhaps the problem is that most of the media think it's a bit dull. If you're sort of defining your economic strategy, I mean, the whole thing about, we're going to deliver growth, etc., that's fine. And I think people understand that. But then if actually you're coming at it quite defensively, we're not doing this, we're not joining the single market, we're not joining the customs union, we're not revisiting the referendum, we're not putting up income tax, we're not raising national insurance, etc. That's sort of quite dull. And that's, I think, why the media's more started to play this game. Well, let's try to get them on another tax. I think where you've got a fair point is that I feel that, and I understand why they've had this kind of pretty Ming Vase approach to this, because Labour has been, was so far behind just 4 years ago. But I think now that the Conservatives do seem to be in such trouble, I think there is far more scope for Labour, even in the next 2 weeks to come, with the time that's left, just get out there and be ultra positive about your own agenda, really start to sort of push through some of the ideas that you've got. So, Frank, you just take one of them, the Green Energy Plan, the GB Energy Plan. Now, I follow this stuff very, very closely, but I know what it is. I know how they think it's going to work, but I'd love to hear more about it. I'd love to see more detail. I think some of the proposals they've got in relation to skills and apprenticeships and education reform, they're really interesting, but I don't think the public are aware of them because Labour's kind of just been playing this pretty safe, pretty cautious, pretty defensive approach.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where I'm getting at. It just feels as though they're gaining from the fact that the Conservatives have kind of had somewhat of a dismal term, particularly of late then as well. Is that what creates this tactical voting, perhaps, that could be in play here, where it's not necessarily that Labour has become a better option, it's just that Conservatives are no longer the right option?
Well, I think you'd be really hard-pressed to find anyone, unless they're absolutely committed to conservatism, the Conservative Party. I don't think anybody can argue that the country's in a better place than it was. And it's not just the last few years. I mean, we've had 5 prime ministers over 14 years. We've had austerity, we've had Brexit that's been a disaster, we've had the COVID Partygate stuff, we've had Truss's ridiculous sort of, experiment, which went so badly wrong. I think it's the anniversary today. And now we've had Rishi Sunak trying to hold these kind of factions together. And frankly, there's no doubt that the Conservatives deserve to lose. But I think what then takes Labour into a really powerful position, if they become a government, is where people feel, yeah, and I've looked at the alternative and I much prefer it. And I want them now to be the government. Now, I think a lot of people have moved in that direction. But I think there's still time in these next 2 weeks really to turn that into a sense of the country coming together behind the change and wanting that government. And that's why I'd like just to see us, maybe a change of tone, a change of gear in terms of projecting the positive reasons to vote Labour.
Alastair, I'm going to try and squeeze 2 in. I want to talk about education and young people in a moment. But first of all, I put in what the latest news on you was, and I came up the New European article you wrote as well, but it was behind a paywall, so I need to know what you were saying. Labour cannot avoid the elephant in the room. What is the elephant in the room for Labour?
Well, I think the elephant in the room for the entire debate is Brexit. I just think it's incredible. If you go back to the last election, what was Johnson's slogan? Get Brexit done. Okay, we've got Brexit done. What's the effect been? If the effect had been good, you'd hear nothing else from the Tories. We promised we'd get Brexit done, and we've done it. They don't talk about Brexit. Farage doesn't talk about Brexit. He's moved on to his new bandwagons. And I just think for Labour if Labour are going to deliver this growth agenda that they want to, which I completely support them on, then we are going to have to address the elephant in the room. We are going to, and if you get behind the paywall, Steve, I've set out a lot of the economic facts on this. Just to give you one, Bloomberg saying that Brexit's basically costing about 100 billion to the economy. I mean, it's just nuts that we're not talking about this.
Absolutely. Right, let's get to one of the key parts of the manifesto that's been talked about, and that says we will increase the engagement of young people in our vibrant democracy by giving 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote in all elections. Alastair, you've got a book in each hand, I think, ready to go. We really need to educate young people, don't we, if they're going to get the vote?
Steve, I can't believe you gave me such an easy invitation to plug a book. So this is the one that's out today. This is for teenagers and young adults, and it's basically and this one's for primary schools, and they're both basically just explaining what politics is, how it works, why it matters, and how you can get involved. And the thing is, I really do think we have a bit of a crisis of kind of the health of our democracy at the moment. And the fact that there was an amazing campaigning by some young people the other day. They got 600,000 people to register to vote on the last day. But we've still got a lot of young people who have not even bothered to register. A lot of young people who just think politics has got nothing to do with them. And I worry, particularly if Trump gets back, I worry that the pressures on democracy are going to get too great. So these are just two very, very simple explanations of what politics is, why it matters, why you've got to get interested, and why you've got to get involved.
The problem is, Alastair, I listened to your namesake on the way home, Nicky Campbell, who does brilliant conversations and talks to people as well. I'm not sure I'm worried about the younger people and their opinions. I'm worried about the rest of the population, Alastair. Do you think the level of political literacy is anywhere near where it needs to be?
Well, if you think, just back to Brexit, the most Googled question in the United Kingdom on June the 24th, 2016 was, what is the European Union? And part of the problem, that was the day after the referendum, and part of the problem is that I think most of our media, back to the point about the way this debate's being covered at the moment, the election's being covered, if all the public here is Sunak slag Starmer, Starmer slag Sunak, talking about opinion polls, talking about, process, I think one of the reasons that our podcast, for example, I think is doing so well is because I think the public actually wants something a bit deeper. And I agree with you. When I go into schools, I find that children are more motivated and have a greater understanding sometimes than we give them credit for. What they don't like and what they're rejecting is the way that politics is done, the way that it's presented to them. And I think a lot of the time, present company accepted, the way that the media talk about politics and cover politics. And as a result of that, when you throw in then all the sort of fake news and the bots and the misinformation and disinformation, it becomes a very unhealthy environment. All I'm trying to do is to say to young people, you are part of the solution to this, not the problem. And I think too often the politicians and the media view them as a problem.
Yeah, I hear you. And the rest is politics. I think it's you and Mr. Stewart as well, isn't it? So it's a great addition to the education. Thank you, Alastair. So. Good luck for Scotland on Sunday, isn't it? You're playing Hungary, is it?
Yeah, I'll be there with my doodle Zach. I managed to smuggle it into the ground in Munich. I don't know whether...
Are you any good at the bagpipes, Alastair?
Very.
Well, there you go. Brilliant. Well, best of luck for Scotland. See, the thing is, the difference between the Scots and the English is the Scots want the English to lose and we want the Scots to win, so as you well know. But anyway, well, I do anyway. Good luck, Alastair. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Alastair Campbell, thanks for joining us. Former Director of Communications and Strategy over at Labour. Right, coming up...